Well, welcome everybody. My name is Sean Cody. I'm the Director of Development at CRI. I want to say thank you for joining us, and more so thank you for Justin for hosting this conversation. The opportunity for us to continue our speaker series, share interesting conversations with one another is just a great opportunity collectively, and certainly for us here at CRI. So just want to say thank you all for just jumping on board, and we've got a couple of more speaker series coming up in the near future, so I hope you'll check those out. On March 10th, we've got one on blockchain and Bitcoin, so nice opportunity with that being in the news quite a bit in these days. But today's all about Justin and cross training, incorporating that into your rowing regimen. So great opportunity. We didn't get a lot of questions beforehand, so I want to put a prompt out there that if you have a question while Justin is speaking tonight, feel free to type it into the chat. I'll monitor that for Justin and give him a little heads up and read it out loud. Or feel free to raise your hand using the functions in the chat and whatnot to go ahead and just type your question there or unmute yourself and interrupt Justin. So again, thanks so much everybody for jumping on board. Thank you, Justin, for doing this with us. And I'll let you kick it off.
To let people know that I really hope that we can have something that's more of a conversation than a lecture. And the topic of cross-training is so incredibly broad. We could go in a million different directions, and I would love to take it in the direction that you guys are most interested in. So I'm going to try and cover some philosophical things that might help guide your decisions about this is what I'm going to choose to do. And then I'm going to try and shake people's brains a little bit, because I have a feeling that a lot of people are doing the same kind of cross training that 18-year-olds and 22-year-olds and Olympic athletes are doing. And I think if that's what's going on, if that's where we're getting our information, we could very much be doing the wrong thing. But the first thing I'm interested in knowing is a little bit more about the group that I'm talking to. In particular, I'd love to know the breakdown in terms of age by decade. How many people are in the 30 to 40? How many people are, or 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50, 50 to 60? Because really, for me, the recommendations shift a ton when we move from decade to decade to decade. So Sean, do you think there's a good way for us to do that? Can we have people shoot you, just a thing and you count it up? I figured if we keep it at a decade, we won't be offending anyone going there. But I did want to get a sense of kind of what the range is, so that I can target some of the things to the middle of the bell curve of that group and maybe talk more to the boundaries of the bell curve.
Absolutely. I can monitor that and kind of give you a census if you want to keep going. If people want to share their ages, they can send it directly to me. So that way, if they don't want to share it with the group, I'll keep it under wraps and aggregate everything. But we've got a couple of great responses already. We're looking in the 50s and 60s right now, Justin. So keep on rolling. Yeah. And I'd say we're in that space.
And that's what I thought. Matt, I can't believe that you're already 50. You were so young a while ago. But I did want to begin, and I wanted to ask people, just if again, they could shoot out or put in the chat, when you use cross training, what are you using it for? When you say, I'm going to cross train today, and then the purpose of my cross training is for this. That's the second question that I have. I'm curious to know what modalities people are using and the purpose associated with the modality of their training. And it would be awesome if people just kind of took the risk and yelled out into the Zoom call and said, well, I run and I do it to increase my cardio, or I lift, or I do band work, or I work with Peter Donahoe, or I meditate, those kind of things. I would love to hear what people are doing. So I'm just going to leave some silence I got one. So we've got 17 people in the chat and one is lifting regularly.
We got
Matt?
two more that seem like they regularly lift, or at least it's in the rotation, Justin.
Great, great. Trail run. Okay. Well, I really, so I'm thinking that the middle of the bell curve of the group in here is in that 50 to 60 range, which is what I anticipated. And then with the cross training mix, it's got, I hope that this is an interesting conversation for us to have about what we're doing. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to launch with I wanted to go through what I feel like are the purposes of cross training. And we can kind of go through them and say, well, there are different things that we can attack. But before I do that, I want to clarify, is Masters Nationals and most Masters races still 1,000? I know a lot of the people here are training and they do the Head of the Charles. Are we still looking at spring races where the primary distance, if you're 50, 60, you're racing 1,000 meters, or is that adapting and becoming really regatta dependent?
The sprints tend to be 1K, and then head races are average 5, 6K.
Right. Okay. So, and it's interesting to me that as they moved into the Masters events, they moved it to 1K because as you age, you become less inclined to be good at anaerobic activity. And when you compare 1,000 meters versus 2,000 meters, the anaerobic component of a 1,000 meter race goes up a ton. And it's just an interesting thing for me to see. I don't know if they think, well, 7 minutes, 8 minutes is too long for people to suffer. So, but we can convince them to come out and suffer and get in the boat and do it for 3 to 4 or to 5 minutes. But let's talk about the purposes here. So I would say purpose number one, I break into I call it function, injury prevention, and pain mitigation. When I turned 35, on the day of my birthday, I got a call from my mom, and it went like this, and I picked up, hello, how are you? And I was like, I'm good. Should I be concerned? She's like, oh, that's such a relief, because when I turned 35, there wasn't a day after that I woke up without pain. And it is one of the things that we experience as we get older. Our joints get stiffer, we get less mobile. We often see kind of the results of our compensations over the course of our lives. And our resiliency kind of diminishes a little bit because our testosterone and our growth hormone goes down. And so really that area of where we're looking at function, injury prevention, and pain mitigation, the things that we look there are, the cross training you're going to do is you're going to do just movement. I now walk very regularly. I have spinal arthritis, so I have to be very careful about when I pick my vigorous activities. And walking is one of those things that I go out. I love being outside. I love being in nature. And when I walk, I have much less pain throughout the course of the day, and I'm generally sharper. And that is just plain movement, just getting out there and using it. Then we've all heard this thing, mobility. And if we think about the body as we go up the chain, the body is designed to go between mobile, stable, mobile, stable, mobile, stable. Has everybody heard that? Does everybody know kind of what I'm talking about when I'm referring to that chain? We're meant to be very mobile in our ankles. We're meant to be very stable in our knees. We're meant to be very mobile in our hips, which so many of us are not. And we're meant to be very stable in our lumbar area of our back and our core. We're meant to be mobile in our thoracic spine and our shoulders. And then we're meant to be stable in kind of the neck and head area. And when we're working on our mobility, we're working on kind of freeing up the things that we want to move and strengthening and locking in the things that we want to be stable, that we don't want to move. And what we see when we have a lot of hip restrictions is if your hips and shoulders don't work well, What do you use to compensate? I'm gonna wait.
Back.
Yes, 100%. We compensate for lack of mobility in our shoulders and lack of mobility in our hips by going to our back, for sure. And does anybody know what percentage of Americans complain about back pain? 80. 80% of Americans say that my back hurts. And when people really go out there and start to free up their shoulders in particular, and start to free up their hips, you're going to start to see a lot more backs feeling better. Now, what to me would represent phenomenally mobile shoulders? A lot of swimmers are hypomobile, so you can see people linking their hands back together, but can everybody see me here? I'm going to try and, one of the tests that I use is I draw my stomach in, tighten my stomach. I have my hand, my elbows the height of my shoulders here. And I imagine that I would have my shoulder blades against the wall and I could have my elbow touch the wall. And then I move my arms up and down. So you've got pinch scapula stable. And what people find is they often hear the crunching. They often feel like, oh my gosh, this is just, once I get up here, it stops wanting to go. So that's just one of the ways you can check that shoulder mobility. And believe it or not, I was really struck as I found out about my thoracic and shoulder mobility and started working through that more from spending time with Peter Donahoe at Hydro. My back has felt better and better and better. And I always felt like it was, oh, my hips are the problem. And if I can fix my hips, then my back will be better. But it was really both my shoulders and my hips that were loading my back from both ends. So I am a huge fan of just basic movement every day, even if it's just get up from your desk for 5 minutes and do, there's all these little quick hitting 5-minute just stretches, take a break, but just keep lubricating the joints and keep moving. And like we said, don't underestimate the power of walking. So many people who get used to working out at such a high level now underestimate the value of just that really easy movement and exercise to keep you pain-free, because the more pain-free you are, the better workouts are going to be. The second one we go to is we talk about, I call this kind of, you're now specifically training the muscle around every joint. And that is kind of maximum anaerobic capacity. So we're talking about, that's kind of the weightlifting area. Once you have good function, once you're pain-free and your joints move the way you're supposed to move, now you're looking at, can I make that joint more powerful? Can I have the ability to produce more force through that joint? Or in my day-to-day activity, can I use a lower percentage of my maximum effort? Does that make sense to folks when I say reduce the percentage of your maximum effort? Yep. Okay. So when you're looking at training your neurological system and training your power, you can talk about, heavy weightlifting, standard weightlifting, Olympic weightlifting like we know it. You can also talk about plyometric training. You do not need to have heavy weight in order for us to get significantly stronger. If you ever do jumping split squats for a minute, which everybody kind of knows what those look like, correct? You're on the mat, your back knee touches the ground, you're kind of bowing almost. Your back knee is touching your split. You leap up in the air and then reverse and then land. If you do that for a minute, you are doing massive neurological and muscular work that your body is going to respond to. That is going to pay dividends as you go out and race 1,000-meter pieces, or even as you go out and race the Head of the Charles. The next thing we'd look at is max aerobic. That is, okay, what is the maximum amount of oxygen your body can consume and utilize? In rowing, you guys are all familiar with that. The tests are somewhere around 15 minutes to 30 minutes long. The same thing would be true in running. Maximum aerobic capacity would be around there. In cycling, the T60 test, like how far can you go or how fast can you go or how many watts you can produce for 60 minutes. And then swimming, Ernie McGlishko was the one who invented the T30, which rowing stole, which was maximum number of meters or maximum velocity you can swim for 30 minutes straight. And that is really then impacting your body's ability to use oxygen. All right, so the higher that is, the more you can get velocity over the head of the Charles course or over your 2K, 6Ks, because you're clearing the lactic acid, your muscles aren't getting bogged down. And then finally is the capacity and endurance section. And I feel like when most people are cross-training right now, that they are doing the sub-maximal longer efforts. A 60-minute cross-country ski would be a sub-maximal longish effort unless you were in a race and really going. Those really enjoyable bikes where you can sightsee and you go out for 2 hour to 3 hours, all those sub-maximal efforts. And what do? They allow you to sustain a percentage of your maximum effort for a longer period of time. And at that point, I want to just open it up to see if that spurred any questions for anybody. But those are kind of the 4 purposes that people would cross-train for. I'm curious if anybody here, when they're cross-training, feels like they're tackling the number 1, the function, injury prevention, pain mitigation. Number 2, the muscular power or maximum anaerobic capacity. Or number 3, the maximum aerobic capacity. Is anybody doing that?
I just want to say what you're saying is just such music. Sorry, I'm cooking dinner. Music to my ears, because I'm coming out of, I had a dreadful injury, neurological injury 3.5 years ago, and had to stop rowing for 3 years. And I started again last spring with the help of a whole lot of specialists. And, one of the big takeaways I got was having to listen to my body.
Yeah.
And so I'm finding doing a lot of, stretching and mobility training, and I'm doing a ton of hiking right now. And
Awesome.
It just feels fantastic.
Yep.
And just something I would say is for this summer, I was doing, I couldn't row 2 days in a row, so I was rowing every other day and building up really slowly. And on the off days, I was biking, and I was a mess. And one of my professionals helping me said, no, you can't do the rowing and the biking because you're sitting in both of those. And she was all about how you got to do these micro movements of all these different parts of your body. She said, you got to be swimming or walking vigorously on those non-rowing days.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And it really helped me, has really helped usher me out of this. So I'm so thrilled to hear what you're saying. And I went for a 2-hour hike today in the snow up hills. So.
Oh, good. Yeah. And the strength that accompanies that when somebody goes uphill with an 80-pound pack in the New Hampshire mountains, that is just phenomenal cross training, because you're holding with your core as you're going up, and 80-pound packs are huge. I got used to these really hardcore hikers that were doing these things, but even anything against gravity is so good. And so the next concept that I wanted to introduce to this cohort in particular, thank you for sharing that with us, Susie. Yeah. The thing that I wanted to share with this cohort is how many people are familiar with the term sarcopenia. So this is going to be a term that is going to be very interesting, because it has changed my thought process about what I should be doing as somebody who's in his mid-50s. And sarcopenia is basically what happens as we age, and when we go beyond our peak, which would be late 20s or early 30s, depending on how genetically lucky we are and active we are. we then start to have lower levels of testosterone, lower levels of hormones in our body, and we become less young. And if you're inactive, starting in that 30s range, mid 30s range, we start to lose muscle mass. Inactive people lose muscle mass somewhere around 3 to 5% a year. And extreme cases of it are, if you've ever seen somebody get really, really sick, and then you go in and you see the atrophy that has occurred when they've been in bed, unable to do anything for 2 weeks. That is just a massively kind of highlighted version of what severe inactivity does to us. And so interesting, sarcopenia, when you pull it out of the Latin, it actually, in Latin, it translates to a poverty of flesh. And as we age, the function of our muscles and our connective tissue diminishes a little because we're missing some of those youthful hormones. But we also, if we're not using it, we're losing it. Our body is shedding muscle mass. And that's an area where I start to look at, gosh, if you're going to race in these maximum events, because 5,000 meters, guys, the head of the Charles is an extremely intensive event. We as rowers think, oh, it's not a 2K, so that's cool because, you know, we don't have the battery acid taste in our mouths, and we don't have 17 millimoles of lactic acid coursing through our blood, but it is a massively intensive event. And if we are not active in our pursuit of combating sarcopenia, which means that we are working to tell our muscles, nope, you can't go away, we still need you. Nope, the demands that I'm putting on you require that you remain with me. And it's incredibly interesting to kind of look at power athletes. Like, think about Olympians, and when you think about an Olympic marathon runner, do you think about someone who's ripped? Not really. I see Sean shaking his head a little bit. Sean, describe to me, when you look at Olympic marathoners, what you see when you're looking out there.
Very thin, but that's about it. Like, that's where I'll leave that. But
And do you see a lot of muscular definition on them?
no,
Yeah.
I would not.
Now, what do you think about, guys, when you see Usain Bolt, the fastest man in the world? Has anyone ever seen a flabby 400-meter runner? Never. And that's where suddenly, you know, we start looking at what we do, and we start looking at how we use our cross training so much for endurance. And somehow this whole thing about training for volume, like Olympians do, Olympians train with a massive amount of volume. And we hear all the time, hey, if you're training, you want to have this huge pyramid. You want to have this gigantic aerobic base down here. And then when you build that aerobic base, it allows you to go higher and higher and higher. The truth is, going very slowly for long distances is going to allow you to get good at going very slowly for long distances. And when we describe the requirements of our sport, and what we're asked to do when we go out and race, or the things that we're losing our genetic advantage on and our bodies aren't doing for us naturally, does it make sense for an 18-year-old who has very young, so hasn't done a lot of training throughout the course of their lives, but who's also approaching their maximum peak in terms of the amount of growth hormone their body's producing, the amount of testosterone their body's producing, all of those things. Does it make sense for them to build a lot of aerobic base? Yes. But they're also doing, most of the serious trainers are doing all of the hard work that you want to do. They're doing weight training, they're doing speed training, and they're doing threshold training. The problem is, if you weight train for once a week, if you do a really serious, if you weight train twice a week, you do a really serious speed training session once a week, and you do a threshold session once a week, it is incredibly difficult to fit more high intensity stuff around that. Does that make sense to everybody? So when elite athletes start doing more and start trying to outwork one another, they can't say, well, I'm going to run 200s in the morning, and then I'm going to come out in the afternoon and run mile repeats. Why not? Why can't they do that? I know people know the answer to this. People are on mute. You're muted, Scott. I can't hear you.
They'll break down.
Yes. There's inadequate recovery. There's inadequate recovery to that. The muscular load, the neuromuscular challenge, if you're running your 200s properly in the morning, you should be 6 hours later, 8 hours later, completely wasted, and your body should be in this real regenerative phase for the next 24 hours, and then again, still regenerating within 24 hours after that. So when we start hearing about incredibly high volumes of training, what I want you guys to know is those volumes are being plugged in around these essential workouts to the speed of your event. Does that make sense to everybody? And what happens a lot is as we get older and when we're alone, like I absolutely do not want to go in my basement by myself and do 4 1,000 meter pieces at 2K goal pace. It is not anything that I want to do alone. Like I need my peeps there. I need to look over and see somebody suffering with me. And I need people behind me saying, you got to keep going. You can keep doing this. So as I trained more alone and I did more and more stuff by myself, what ended up happening was I was doing more and more long, slow, easy distance, which you get really good at doing long, slow, easy distance. I could go in a straight line for 10 hours at a time and you know, manage it. But when it came to going fast, I did not help myself at all. I did not, when I was doing 20 to 24 hours of training for Ironman, my 2K got slower, not faster. Why? Because all of that work for going long distances slowly was taking away my capacity to go any distance fast. So let's talk about, you know, kind of what it means to go fast. We talked about those different levels of cross training. And the first thing that I would say is before you decide to do anything super intensive, make sure the body is working right. Make sure the body is functioning correctly. It is worth getting a functional movement screening. It is worth going in to see a physical therapist and say, I need to be evaluated because I need to know what's not working. Because if you load, let's say, for instance, I have severe shoulder immobility, which comes along a little bit with my spinal arthritis, also comes along with sitting on a computer all day. It also comes along with rowing and all the things that I've done. Suddenly my shoulder mobility is terrible. And if my shoulders are immobile and now I try and do something really, really aggressive and my shoulders can't do what they're supposed to do, my back is going to do it for them as long as it can until it's too sore for me to keep going. And the same thing applies to the hips. And the same thing applies to, wow, when I was training for my first Ironman, 2 weeks before the first Ironman, I accidentally made a big misstep and I really sprained my ankle. And I iced and did all of these things. And they're like, you should absolutely not run this. They said, there's no way. And I said, no, I can do it. It's feeling better. You know, it's not really taxing. And then my therapist made me stand on my toe on that single leg for 3 minutes straight and said, well, you have the function, you have the strength to be able to do it. Since I did that, that knee on that side has not felt the same. It has not been the same. Because within that event, everything that my ankle couldn't do, my knee was doing. And it works its way right up the train. So when we don't pay attention to our elbows and our shoulders, our backs are going to do more. When we don't pay attention to our ankles, our knees are going to do more. When we don't pay attention to our hips, our backs are going to do more. And so before we load up, being able to move incredibly well is really crucial. And I can tell you, you will not regret it if you suddenly free your hips up and create a whole bunch of space and create this ability to move. You will be surprised at how good you feel. That next phase, we talk about, okay, now we say, let's say we want to row the head of the Charles. And we know the head of the Charles is an endurance event, right? Everybody, head of the Charles, 20 minutes long, endurance event, right? It's a maximum endurance event, but it is an endurance event, certainly compared to rowing 2K. So one of the things about endurance training is, let's say this is as fast as I can go for 1 minute. Okay, well, how fast am I going to be able to go for 20 minutes? This fast? Can everyone see that? Can everyone see my hands? Good. Now, so we know, okay, if I can go this fast for 1 minute, probably go this fast for 2, this fast for 3, 4, 5, 6. So somewhere around here is my 2K, you know, right around here. I can go, I don't want to throw out a percentage because I know you guys are scientific and will go in and check me on that. So I don't want to give the exact percentage of the 1 minute. I think it's somewhere around, if you do a maximum 1 minute test, I think it's somewhere around 50 to 52%. Matt, can you remember that at all? If that's somewhere around that 1 minute to 2K transition conversion, or Pat, if you're in there, can you remember at all if that's the number?
I cannot remember. I can try to look up real quick.
Okay. Yeah, if you don't mind toying around with that, Pat, that would be great. And the reason I'm explaining that is, guys, so let's just say, here's my 1 minute, here's my 2K, and here's what I can do for head of the Charles. Right? Like here's my distance. Now, when you start training endurance, your endurance training allows you to sustain a higher percentage of your maximum. Here, 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 here. The more work you do, though, we have a declining curve of gains. So there's another way to think about it. If I want to go faster for the head of the Charles, I can train and try and lift my percentage of maximum up, or I can get better function, get stronger, more powerful, and I can move my 1 minute score to here. Now my same percentage of that is here. Does that make sense to folks? Everything is a percentage of your maximum capacity. If you improve your maximum capacity, you are going to have definitely an impact on everything that's downstream from there. And that is something that a lot of people miss when they say, I'm going to go for my cross training, I'm going to go for my run, I'm going to go for my bike, I'm going to go for my ski, I'm going to go for my swim. They're all going to be sub-maximal. They're all going to be butting up against whatever your percentage of max is. But if you can sustain muscle mass as a 40-year-old or a 50-year-old or a 60-year-old that your other competitors don't, those muscles are going to be able to produce force, and your maximum is going to be higher. And when your maximum's higher, if your maximum's 5% higher than your competitors, and you can both function at 52% of your maximum 1 minute, your 50%, your 52% is going to be higher. Does that make sense for folks? I wanted to open it up for questions and find out if anybody is just like, okay, my head's spinning now. What about this? Good. Okay. Pat, have you found it? Oh, Robin, I'm looking in the chat.
I haven't found the exact percentage that way on it, but the 2K or the 60-minute, not 60-minute, 1 minute 60-second test is 153% of your 2K power. So right. I don't know the reverse of that, but right. I found that.
And we understand that that's a mean. So I do think that there's somebody in here who's going to be able to figure this out for us. But like you're saying that, so 153%, if we can increase that 1 minute, and the way we combat sarcopenia. So when we hit 35 and start getting older, if we do not attend to retaining our muscle mass and retaining our function, we're going to be at a natural disadvantage. So if I've already got restrictions in one of my ankles and I have restrictions in my shoulders due to some genetic stuff that's going on, and I'm not attending to that, and I'm going out and I'm biking and I'm running and I'm swimming and I'm not addressing those things, I'm going to miss my maximum because my joints aren't going to allow me to hit maximum. And then I'm going to lose muscle mass because there's nothing that I'm doing in my training that's saying to my body, you got to keep this. You got to have this. And that is something that I think we could really use in our cross training, is stimulate those muscles so that they don't go away, so that they are there for you to train in your boat when the time comes. Hopefully that makes sense to folks. Now, maximum aerobic, everybody knows kind of AT. Everybody loves doing 6K erg tests or 30-minute erg tests. Matt, what are you guys doing for your maximum aerobic testing?
30-minute 22, and then we've done some 6K free rate.
Yeah.
Also, Justin, I ran some numbers anecdotally real quick. I found some athletes that were running 60s to low 70% for 2K to 1 minute max. That was anecdotal. I didn't look online.
Yeah.
I just looked at some previous results.
Based on my numbers from Syracuse, that is like astronomically high. Astronomically high. Can we reverse engineer that with Pat and see what their watts would be at 2K and have calculate what 153% of that would be? Can we play around with that a little bit? All right, cool. Jump back with me on that. So you're looking at that, so what's so interesting is those two aerobic tests are very different. It's 30 minutes at 22, kind of similarly borrowed from Maglishko's swimming T30, and then what GD was doing, they do it at rate 20, but we Americans just aren't as proper and disciplined as the Brits. So we always cheat on the rate. So they were just like, fine, 22. It's way easier to do it at 22 than 20. It's so hard to drive. So the Brits do that test at rate 20 because they want to look at the muscular power combined with your ability to keep going. My athletes, when they would do that, and I bet you Max are the same, they say, doesn't feel like an erg test. And the reason it doesn't feel like an erg test is because you're not swimming in lactic acid. But when we say free rate 6,000 meters, suddenly they're rowing 30 strokes a minute. Their turnover is much higher. They're tapping up against that end. They're starting to see all this lactic acid pour in. They're on the boundary of being able to clear out of their muscle cells and doing all of those things. You're going to see that same like hollowed-eyed appearance that you see when an athlete swims in lactic acid in their test. Really, really interesting. Both measure things a little bit differently. They're super cool, and that's basically what we do. I read a fascinating book. It's really fun to read, called The Perfect Mile. Has anybody else here read it? It's a chronicle of the race to break the 4-minute mile between Bannister and Landy and Wes Santee, and they dig into the training that they're doing and the psychological stuff, and it's incredibly interesting when you look at what Roger Bannister did. Roger Bannister basically trained on his lunch hour. He got out, he was training as a medical student and as a resident doctor, got out, took the tube over, so had very little time. He would, once a week, he would run 35 minutes at maximum effort. So he was out there knocking out, a little over, he was knocking out a little over 10,000 meters in that, like, just really delivering like 5-minute miles over I think he was doing 7 miles in 35 minutes at lunch, then eating, then going in. There is his maximum aerobic training session. The other major session that he was doing each week is he was running 10 quarter miles at his goal pace for 4 minutes, which is a 60-second quarter mile with 1 minute rest in between. And the rest of it was just easy miles and staying fresh and doing those things. And he relied on his teammates with him. He had his good friends pace him on that. And it was incredible to look at how those two things, the speed specific, power muscular, like very high anaerobic component of that 4x400 meter or 10x400 meter training, his long aerobic, and then the rest of the stuff that he had done. It was really interesting to read and hear what all of these other guys were doing. And so as you guys think about what you're doing with your training, what I really want to ask you is, where am I with my age and where am I with my potential loss of muscle mass and loss of function? How long have I been carrying around whatever restrictions in my body that I've had, and how do I make them better? What are the things that I do to make them better? The second thing is, what are the requirements for my event right now? How powerful do I need to be in order to execute my event? And I ran some numbers. So if you take a look at it, like an 8-minute 2K is somebody has to go 202 watts for 8 minutes, in order to go 8 minutes flat for 2,000 meters. Now, when you say, okay, now what is somebody who does an 8-minute 2K, what's that average person do for their 500? Well, if they do a max 500, they're probably somewhere around 147, which is 285 watts up there, just way up there. And when I look at those and you say, okay, well, so there's two ways that I could do that. If, let's say I pull a 147 split, and now what I want to do is I want to train my endurance, 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 8 minutes. But what if I could do work and get stronger, get higher velocity, get better anaerobic power, and now I can pull a 145 split? I would think that that person with that same training would be able to go 158. And that's something that a lot of us, when we're cross training, aren't really looking at. How do I develop the muscle so that I can have the power so that I can then go fast enough to be really, really good in my event? Versus, it just feels good to go out and breathe at 50 to 70% of my maximum. And I love it, and I get the high, and it clears my mind, and I dump the stress, and all of those things are awesome. And I encourage everybody to do them if they make you feel good, but it isn't necessarily training, right? Exercising helps us live longer, it helps us live healthier, and it makes us happy. And training is specifically designed to achieve an objective relative to an event. Does that make sense to everybody? And a lot of people, when they're cross-training, we go out and exercise, and we're cross-training without really thinking about, what do I need to do to succeed in my event? How do I want to apply these various principles and move forward? Now, let's talk about training for rowing. Big problem, training for rowing. And the reason is whenever you're going to cross-train for an activity, you have to train each one of the joints involved in the event. Does that make sense? So whatever joint you use in your competitive event, you have to train that joint and the surrounding muscles that move it and the systems that are required for it in order to be successfully cross-training for your rowing event. So what is the obvious problem here with rowing? I'm going to let it go until somebody answers.
It's hard to find another
use
sport
all
that
of them.
uses all your joints.
Every single one of your joints. I mean, you could stay slack faced the whole time. You could train like this, and then you will use your jaw or your eyebrows, or if you don't turn your head, you're not using certain, but like you're gripping with your hands. So everything surrounding your knuckles. You feather the blade. Has anyone here had fire paw? Working everything surrounding this joint right here. We squeeze our elbows through and our shoulders back. We bend forward and backwards with our trunk. Sometimes we twist from left and right. Then our hips compress and we go down into a full squat, and we do that over and over and over again. So cross training for rowing. Rowing is phenomenal cross training for other sports. Cross training for rowing is really, really hard. Like if you ride the bike, that's awesome for everything below your belly button and your cardiovascular system. But I would say if you're going to train for rowing, ride your bike for an hour and then swim for an hour with a pull buoy or something like that. Skiing, yes, Christina, 100%. And the thing that I love about skate skiing as well is it involves grace and balance and rhythm, which is an aspect of rowing. The three sports that take place on water that are phenomenal are rowing itself, swimming, and skiing or ice skating. And though skiing and ice skating are water sports. The water's just really, really, really cold. So you think about it, they use those muscles when you're skate skiing. You are using your shoulders, your arms, your triceps and pushing through. You are holding your trunk steady. You're working on finding your body's center of gravity and gliding over a ski and gliding over a ski and gliding over a ski. And if you don't transition your body weight in rhythm with the skis, you fall down and you're not nearly as effective. So I love that people are already keying into this idea of training. So if you're thinking, well, I really want to row fast this summer, and on this winter, what I have available to me is Peloton instead of a hydro. You're looking at, okay, I am exercising my cardiovascular system. I am exercising the ankle, the knee joint, the hip. So I'm getting glutes, quads, hamstrings, all of those things that are really important to the sport of rowing. But now what do I have to do in order for us to really be successful and translate that to the handle, which is in the oar? We have to make sure that our core is strong enough. We have to make sure that our shoulders strong enough. We have to make sure that our grip's strong enough. And that's where, again, I just keep saying it over and over and over again in our sport. Strong, strong, strong. You need a strong grip. You need a strong core. You need strong hips. You need strong mind. And then the other thing that we talk about is there are a couple things that you can train that in cross training that not a lot of people think about. Training your mind. I have seen nobody better than Christine Cavallo at focusing with incredible intensity and purpose for long periods of time. Compared to her, I am a Labrador puppy, just going squirrel, squirrel, squirrel. Like my mind is noisy. I catch myself drifting off. And athletic concentration, the ability to do what you have, what you need to do with what you have, where you are, and stay locked into that moment to get the maximum out of it. Meditation is hard for a lot of people. But if you can work on quieting your mind and finding points of focus in an aspect of your life where you don't work out, you might find that your focus on the water and your ability to stay locked into your partner, your ability to stay engaged and on task and really go to that next level of depth in terms of your self-awareness can be incredibly high. The other thing is the specificity of the mental resilience for the event. Does anybody know, does anyone want to take a guess at why kind of the wall of the marathon is right around the 20 mile mark? Take a risk. It's okay, even if it's a different answer. Barbara looks
Justin,
so
does that have
close.
anything to do with the training regimen leading up to and sort of your last run before the big race?
So what do you think? How many people here know somebody who trained for a marathon and ran a marathon? What's the longest training run they did?
They're typically like 20, 22 miles.
Yes. In my opinion, from what I've experienced, the wall in the marathon is a huge part to do with people's nutritional practices. They are usually just completely empty because people fuel so poorly when they're training for a 4-hour event. And then 2, they have never been out and on their feet doing the thing that they need to do for the duration that the event requires. And so when I would train people for marathons, we would begin walking quite a bit, because their longest days, if their goal was to run a 4-hour marathon, their longest run might be 90-minute run, then a 90-minute walk, and then a 75-minute run. So they're actually on their feet for 4 hours and 15 minutes. They're paying tremendous attention to their nutrition as they're working in there. And those people didn't have, when they got their nutrition right and they had been out there and they had experienced what it would like to cross over that 4-hour barrier, they were there. So looking at kind of the psychological demands of the duration of your event is also really an interesting, how long will I need to be locked in here? Is it a 6-minute event? Is it a 3-minute event? How do I get really good at being dialed in at the specific velocity and in those specific circumstances that we do? Well, I have just blathered for an hour now, and I'd love to open it up to really let people ask questions, because I've covered most of the ground that I wanted to cover. And you guys are all noticing that I didn't say, do this. But what I did say is, think about this. Think about sarcopenia. Think about whether when you're going out, you're training or exercising, because it's totally awesome to go out and exercise and feel better and dump the stress that you've had from this pandemic or whatever day you've had, and feel good. The more joy and less pain you have, the more you're going to be great at training and be a great teammate. But if you are really thinking about a specific upcoming event, dissect the requirements of that event and make sure that you're preparing the energy systems that need to be prepared, the joints and the muscles that surround the joints that you're going to need to use, and be really aware of the psychological demands of what you're going to be encountering, and prepare yourself for them. Prepare yourself to be in those conditions. I recommended that one book, The Perfect Mile. It's a great read. There's another really enjoyable running book, maybe enjoyable. It's gigantic. It's called The Lore of Running by Dr. Tim Noakes. And he developed what's called the central governor theory. And his theory is that fatigue is not physical. You're not slowing down because you don't have enough glucose or glycogen in your system. You're not slowing down because you're suddenly not getting the oxygen into the muscles that you need. He's proven it. He's gone and he's tested people, and they've been slowing down, and he's measuring the amount of glucose and glycogen in their system, and it's not changing at all. They have what they need. He is watching people slow down, and he's measuring their O2 and CO2, their O2 input and their CO2 output, and it's not changing. What he argues is the majority of our fatigue is the argument that's going on between the part of your brain that says go, 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 and the survival part of your brain that is watching your core temperature go up, watching you consume calories at a rate that's unsustainable for you, basically saying, we can't keep doing this. Stop, 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 stop. So deep, 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 deep down in your conscious brain, the one that wants to achieve this objective is fighting your lizard brain, which is saying, we need to conserve our energy for survival and doing these things. And we're not hunting our food right now. So we shouldn't be running this fast. We shouldn't be running for this long. And our brain is like, but we've got this goal. And that argument creates the conditions which just wears us out. And suddenly it's like having a governor in your vehicle. You can't go any faster, or after a certain amount of time, you start to slow down. And when people find ways to break through that system, and that's what Bannister was doing. Nobody had ever run for a mile straight at that pace before in life. But what he did is he did so many efforts where his body and his mind became comfortable with going at that exact speed. And he knew that if he could do 10 repeats with 1 minute rest, he could eventually, hopefully, put 4 of those together when he had the right conditions and deliver the first sub 4 minute in the history of mankind. And that's the show. And I didn't even take a sip of beer the whole time. So who's got questions?
First is, how did you do that? Because that's pretty special. But if there's any questions, feel free to chime them in the chat. We can jump in there and ask away, but I hope people won't be shy. Justin, that was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome, guys. I miss talking with people about sport. And what I found is this audience is just, there's a bunch of really smart people who are just a little too shy. And I'm trying to break through and get them to be like, what about this? Or I heard this, or I read this. Because it's really fun to talk about. Really fun. Matt, were you able to kind of run those numbers backwards? What did you get?
Yeah, I sort of reverse engineered it. I saw there's a pretty good correlation with 150% from 2K to max watts from what I found.
Nice. That's awesome.
I clearly just did my math wrong.
No, I don't think you. No, I think when you reverse it, going back, I think you're right. Yeah. And again, looking at that max effort. So if that group is unpleased with their 2Ks, they can look at functioning at a higher percentage of their maximum, or we can make them really powerful, right? We can work on developing and changing that portion of their speed.
So I have a
So
question.
when you're looking at cross training and you're looking to develop power and sort of do something aside from just aerobic cross training, with what I think a lot of rowers do, like, do you have any specific modalities or types of cross training that you're looking to use for different functions? Like, are you using cross country skiing for one thing and cycling for another, or something like that?
I have reached the do as I say, not as I do phase of my life. What I'm doing right now for cross training mostly is tuna fishing and dog walking. But your question is a great one. And I think that in our sport, we reached a point where volume was all the rage, especially, from kind of like 1980 on. And we started looking at what all these Olympians were doing. And the thing is once you hit your neurological threshold and your hormonal threshold to do hard work, you cannot do more of that level of work. But the people that were going to work harder than everybody else in the world, all they could do then was add more over distance and bring their threshold up. But if you start with somebody, so I really, Pete has changed my mind. Pete Donahoe has changed my mind so much as he has exposed some of my dysfunction that I was unaware of. And so I really think, and one of the things that's happening with the young athletes now, in the 1980s, pediatric orthopedics, what they dealt with mostly was trauma, sprained ankles, concussions, collisions, football, this, that. There was a shift that occurred as play became less common and helicopter parents emerged more and scholarships became more important because schools became, there was a shift that took place around 2000 where pediatric orthopedic people were seeing way more overuse injuries, swimmers with bad shoulders, runners with pelvic stress fractures and things like that, that were a result of just high volumes of training and non-diversity in their movements and not enough structure to support what they were doing. So I am a huge believer in, I think I've underestimated the power of the importance of being strong. And anecdotally, when I go back and I look at my best athletes, almost all of them were strong in some natural way. I didn't create strength, they just showed up strong and then we trained that. And Tom Terhar right now, when he's doing a lot of his selecting, he's looking at the 1 minute test is way more important because he knows if he finds somebody who's off the charts in her 1 minute, he can train the volume if she has the will. Yeah. All right. Well, that's it, gang. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. What happened last time is that people got courageous after and sent TED notes that TED then sent on to me. That is totally fine if you want to do that. But expect me to give you a hard time about not asking in the group. Thanks, guys. I really enjoyed it. And I hope everybody is excited for the 50-degree day we're going to have later this week.